my god, I love this camera. This camera, there's an built-in microphone.
Ready? Yeah, ready. Alright. Ready?
Wonderful anniversary, dear, and thank you for the flowers.
You're welcome, darling. But if you could do one thing for me,
What?
try to do something about your coffee.
I hope it will be better today.
Oh, no.
What's wrong?
So it's just coffee again. The desk sergeant at the station makes better coffee than this.
How can such a...
I can't type. I don't take dictation. I won't sharpen pencil. I can't file. My boss calls me indispensable.
Miss Jones,
Just a minute.
will you make a copy of this?
The woman of the 1960s, as depicted in these two commercials, is expected to fulfill the needs of the man. Whatever needed to be done for him was done, and done perfectly. This sets up the subservient role that women were placed in, not just in the 1960s, but throughout centuries prior. It is during these times and before that women were not only expected to maintain order in the house in order to ease the stress of the man, but they were also expected to please the man whenever he desired. The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan characterizes the issue that has started to become more prevalent with women. Friedan calls it the problem that has no name, which was the widespread unhappiness of women in the 50s and early 60s. Women, although living in material comfort and being married with children, basically living a life that was assumed to be perfect at the time, were still strangely unhappy with the lives they lived. The skepticism within women towards society grows. Their curiosity grows. Soon enough, you have women who question the confining nature of their role in society.
Why is it that man gets to work and go home and relax, whereas I am expected to maintain order on all levels of the household?
Why is it that I have to be the ideal woman in the eyes of man in order to get anywhere in this society?
Why is it that I'm viewed as the less capable one?
The sexism, the misogyny brought on by feminine stereotypes and gender roles create the box. This is the box. Let's pretend, for argument's sake, that this box is clear. You are in a clear box. You go through your entire life living in this box. Over time, you are unaware of the box's existence. That is, until you started seeing the smudges. Over time, dirt and filth start to collect on top of the box, and it continues to pile on. You call out to others to help you, to clean the box, to get you out of the box entirely, but they don't see it. To them, the dirt, the box, it was simply a part of nature. The grime blended into the mix of normalcy. To them, there is no box. To you, however, the box is everything. The box of femininity, established and enforced by the patriarchy, confines the woman. And the reality is, not many women of the 60s and 70s realize this. That is, until something, whether it be an action or an incident, widens their perspectives on gender-based injustices ingrained within the society. You go through your life unaware of it, the inequality, because the inequality is so ingrained into your mind that it's second nature to you. It's normal. But then something happens. You're paid less than him. He touches you like you're some toy. And then you realize that behind all the smoke and mirrors of an idealized society exists the dirt, the misogyny. Or for the case of Marianne, it's a whole world she has yet to experience. And from then on, things are never the same. The box exists not only for Marianne Bell, but also for the women of the 60s and 70s. And in many ways, the revelation the women experience parallels the revelation Marianne Bell experiences in the chapter Sweetheart of the Saint-Trabant. Which brings me to my topic, which is how Marianne Bell's changing character reflects the women of the second wave feminist movement. Marianne, much like the women of the time period, was your average all-American girl. She was the literal embodiment of femininity during that time. She had the blue eyes, the blonde hair, the white legs, the strawberry complexion. Not to mention, she had a bubbly personality. She was really friendly, too. She was fresh out of high school, and not only that, but her plans almost coincide with the wholesome family image that was prevalent in the 50s and 60s. Marianne expected to live in a fine gingerbread house near Lake Erie, have 3 healthy yellow-haired children, and grow old with Mark Fosse. That was the plan. She was going to go get married and live out the rest of her days as the subservient housewife to Mark Fosse. It never bothered Mark Fosse because to him, to her, and to the many women back home in America, this was the normal dream to have. Getting married and having children was so normal in this time period, it was expected that women were to carry out their lives in that manner. But then Vietnam happens. She goes to Vietnam to sit alongside Mark Fosse during combat, but as she's in this entirely different environment, she begins to grow more curious of her surroundings. She wants to venture out into the local village, and she wants Mark Fosse to take her there. The women of the 60s and 70s too became curious and skeptical of the society they were a part of, much like Marianne when she becomes curious of what lurks beyond the compound. She gets a dose of Vietnam in the local village, and just that one little dose, and it sparks a flame within her. Her pretty blue eyes seem to glow at the sight of Vietnam. She couldn't get enough of it. Her whole demeanor begins to radically change because of this feeling Vietnam had struck within her. What Vietnam is to Marianne is what sexism and misogyny is to the women of the 60s and 70s. For the women of the second wave feminist movement, they too start to radically change in the response to the rampant sexism that was so ingrained in the society. Their curiosity made them aware, and this awareness strikes a chord within all of them. This feeling prompts them to change, not just their demeanor, but also the society that had put them in the box. Marianne had not only started to get her hands bloody in the war, but she also stopped wearing cosmetics. She stopped the fingernail filing. She stopped wearing jewelry. And she cut her hair short and tied it up in a dark green bandana. Her voice seemed to reorganize itself at a lower pitch, and the bubbliness she once had was gone. She essentially stops being feminine. She stops doing traditionally feminine things and wearing traditionally feminine items. There was a new confidence in her voice, a new authority in the way she carried herself. It made Mark Fosse uncomfortable because for Mark Fosse, not only was his Lake Erie dream crumbling, but he was losing his control on Marianne. Marianne was starting to become an individual, her own being. The farther she would venture into Vietnam, the more self-aware she would become. A majority of women that were a part of the second wave feminist movement were the housewives. But as they became aware of the injustices within society, they start to move from that housewife mentality. They become their own person, their own being, and in that respect, the men of the household, the husbands, are further losing their grip on their wives. Soon enough, Mark Fosse loses his grip on Marianne entirely. Finally, she did not come in at all. This leaves Mark Fosse in shambles until he finds out that Marianne's been out on fucking ambush. She comes back to the compound, she's exhausted, and she insists that her and Fosse will talk later about her absence. She's now demanding something of Fosse, and she does not make time for his worries or troubles, which is what would be expected of the women of the time period. Marianne and the rest of the women back home were expected to fulfill their duties regardless of how they felt, regardless of how tired they were. When Marianne has the least bit of authority in the situation at hand, Mark Fosse quickly becomes frustrated. Not later, he yells, now. Time passes. Compromise, Fosse said. I'll put it this way. We're finally engaged. And once again, Marianne is shoved back into the box. Whatever authority and confidence she once had ceased. Whatever trace of Vietnam she had left, gone. Marianne's hair was freshly shampooed. She wore a white blouse, a navy blue skirt, a pair of plain black flats. Over dinner, she kept her eyes down, poking at her food, subdued to the point of silence. This was the problem that had no name. To look at them from a distance, Rat said, you would think Marianne and Mark Fosse were the happiest two people on the planet. Although Marianne and the women back home looked visibly happy, their lives perfect in every way possible, there was still a fragility to it, something tentative and false. Something was off. Marianne should be happy because she's now engaged to the love of her life, right? The women of the time era should be happy because they're living in material comfort and they're married with children, right? No, it's not right at all, because Marianne and the women of the second wave feminist movement felt something beyond their realm of understanding. After they felt something that made them feel free, they realized that they could no longer go back to the lifestyle they originally lived. But when Mark Fosse pulls Marianne back into marriage, basically forcing her to revert back to how she was before Vietnam, he essentially rips her from her true source of happiness, her true source of liberation. He rips her away from something that freed her from the system of oppression that she adhered to back in the compound and even back at home. The cyclical nature of oppression had to end somewhere. It had to end, and it eventually did. She goes out on ambush once more. 3 weeks later, she comes back, but even then, she doesn't revert back to the way she was before. She's no longer too polite or too thoughtful. Marianne, along with the second wave feminists, became aware of what was wrong, what was beyond the American box of a supposedly ideal life. They couldn't go back to the housewife mentality. They were already gone. They were gone from the moment they learned, and although attempts will be made to pull them back into the box, they will never be able to stay in the box because they know. Marianne and the women back home know what it's like in the box, the confinement. They felt what it's like outside the box, and just that one lick, and they're never coming back. It's not bad. Marianne and the feminists' change in demeanor, their newfound purpose, it's not bad. But the society of the time treats this change of mentality like it is bad. Phyllis Schlafly, a prominent anti-feminist figure, traveled across the U.S. through the 1970s calling for the opposition to the Equal Rights Amendment, which was a proposed amendment that would guarantee equality under the law for women. She called for this opposition because she thought it would lead to homosexual marriages, women in combat, taxpayer-funded abortions, and unisex bathrooms. But they never acknowledged the existence of the box. They never truly felt the confining nature of the box. They've always been on the outside looking in. You just don't know, Marianne said. You hide in this little fortress behind wire and sandbags and you don't know. Mark Fosse didn't know, the platoon didn't know, a lot of America didn't know what it was like. To them, the women, Marianne, were changing for the worse. They're all insane, unnecessary. The women were insane, but were they really? When Marianne is out there in Vietnam, feeling it in all its dirt and death, she feels close to herself. When she's out there at night, she feels close to her own body. She can feel her body moving, her skin and fingernails, everything. She knows exactly who she is. When she wasn't out there in Vietnam, she was separated from herself. Her own mind and body were foreign to her until she was introduced to Vietnam. And in that respect, the women of the second wave feminist movement had faced a similar separation. They were well off with a house, husband, and children. They had seemingly perfect, wholesome lives. But why is it that deep down they were all still unfulfilled? Why is it that they were unhappy? Then they learned why. The misogyny and sexism, it made them self-aware. They understood, just like Marianne, they know exactly who they are now. The women of the 60s and 70s changed how we define femininity, and they laid the foundation for the third wave feminist movement. And from there, they could never go back to the way they once were, unaware. Marianne runs off into the forests of Vietnam, now free from the box and is never to be found again. They are not insane, they are free.
She just finished! You're late! How do you feel? How do you feel? Huh? Well,
show it to me later.
It's good. You can watch it through the camera.
I'm posting it on Tumblr. Are you recording?
Yeah, still.
Oh, my words so much.
Yeah, it got deep after, like, yeah. Good job.
My hands, like,